You have probably noticed it. Maybe it happened to you directly. Maybe someone you loved described it and you listened carefully but did not know what to say. Maybe you have carried the memory of it quietly for months or years, not quite sure what to do with it. The person who knew you longest. The one whose voice you still expect to hear when the phone rings. The one whose chair still looks wrong with someone else sitting in it. The grief arrives, and it is not what anyone prepared you for. It is heavier than expected and stranger than expected, and it lives in places you did not anticipate. In the smell of a coat, in the silence after dinner, in the specific quality of light on a Sunday morning that used to mean something and now means absence. And then, sometimes within days, sometimes within hours of the loss, a cardinal appears at tea window, on the fence posts, at the edge of the yard, on a branch so close you could almost reach out and touch it if the glass were not there. And it stales. And it stales. Not flying away the moment you shift your weight. Not startling at the sound of the door opening. Not behaving the way birds normally behave around humans, which is cautiously, briefly, always ready to leave. This bird stays, and it looks at you. Not the rapid darting glance of a bird checking for danger. Something slower. Something that feels in a way you cannot fully articulate, like attention. And something in you goes very still, because it does not feel random. It feels like something, and you do not say that out loud because you are not sure anyone will understand. Because the rational part of your mind is already preparing an explanation. Territorial behavior. Coincidence. The feeder being nearby. The way grief makes everything feel more significant than it is, but the explanation does not quite fit the experience. And so you stand there at the window, or you sit very still in the yard, and the cardinal stays, and for a moment, the grief shifts. Not disappears, not lifts entirely, but shifts, like a weight redistributed, like a breath you did not realize you had been holding finally releasing. Millions of people across America have had this experience. Not thousands, millions. Across every state, every background, every age, every belief system. People who consider themselves deeply spiritual and people who have never believed in anything they could not verify with their own hands. People who grew up religious and people who walked away from religion decades ago. The experience does not seem to care about those distinctions. It arrives for people who were expecting it and for people who would have told you an hour earlier that they did not believe in signs. And for a long time, most of them kept it to themselves because they were not sure anyone would understand. Because our culture does not give us very much language for these moments. Because saying out loud that a bird appeared after your mother died and it felt like her requires a kind of vulnerability that grief already makes almost impossible. Tonight I want to talk about why this happens. Not just what people believe. Not just what feels true. In a moment when the heart is open and the yard is quiet. But what science has actually found about this bird, about this specific behavior, about the relationship between cardinals and human beings, and about why this connection runs so deep in American culture that it has become part of how we grieve. Stay until the end. Because what we cover in the final section is the part that most people say stays with them the longest. And I think you will understand why when we get there. The northern cardinal is one of the most recognizable birds in North America. That red. That red that stops you mid-motion the first time you really see it up close. Not orange. Not pink. Not the washed-out approximation of red that appears on so many other birds. A red so saturated it almost looks artificial. A red that seems to glow slightly in low light, as if there is a small amount of warmth being generated from inside the feather itself. There is no other bird quite like it in the American backyard. The blue jay is striking, the goldfinch in breeding plumage is vivid. But the cardinal carries something different, something that registers in the human visual system as almost alarming in its intensity, as if the color were designed specifically to be seen, and in a biological sense, it was. The red plumage of a male northern cardinal is one of the most studied examples of signal coloration in all of ornithology. The intensity and consistency of that red communicates health, immune function, genetic quality, and reproductive fitness to other birds. It is a broadcast, a statement made in color, a signal that evolved over millions of years specifically because it needed to be noticed. What most people do not know is that the red you see is not the full picture. Birds are tetrachromats. They see 4 channels of color, where humans see 3. The 4th channel extends into ultraviolet light, wavelengths completely invisible to human eyes without equipment. And the red plumage of a male cardinal reflects ultraviolet light in patterns that add an entire additional dimension of visual information that no human has ever directly perceived. What you see when a cardinal lands at your feeder and you think you are seeing the full intensity of that red, you are actually seeing a reduced version. A 3-channel approximation of something that exists in 4 dimensions of color simultaneously. The bird is even more vivid than you have ever been able to see. Cardinals are also one of the very few birds in North America that do not migrate. When autumn arrives and the yard begins to empty, when the warblers leave and the orioles disappear and the hummingbirds make their long journey south, the cardinal stays. When winter comes and the trees go bare and the feeder sits in cold gray air with nothing moving around it for hours at a time, the cardinal is still there. Red against white snow, color against colorlessness, life against the visual emptiness of the season. For people living through grief, which arrives so often in the colder months, which strips warmth and color from the world, the way winter strips leaves from the trees, a cardinal at the window in those conditions is not a subtle thing. It is the only color in a colorless world. And the grieving human mind, which is searching everywhere for something to hold on to, notices color. It cannot help but notice color. Cardinals are also unusually tolerant of human proximity compared to most backyard birds. Most small birds maintain what researchers call a flight initiation distance, the threshold at which a perceived threat causes them to flee. For most sparrows, finches, warblers, and thrushes, that distance is significant. They startle at movement. They vanish at the sound of a door. Approach too quickly and they are gone before you fully registered that they were there. Cardinals are different. Studies on northern cardinal behavior have consistently documented that cardinals habituate to familiar humans relatively quickly and allow significantly closer approach than most comparable species. A cardinal that visits your yard with regularity will, over time, permit closer and closer proximity. It will remain on the feeder while you refill it from inches away. It will hold its position on a branch while you stand beneath it. It will, in some cases, approach humans directly. For someone in grief, who may be spending more time near windows than usual, moving more slowly than usual, sitting in the yard at quiet hours, existing in that particular kind of stillness that deep loss produces, a cardinal may approach closer than it ever has before. Not because the bird senses grief in any mystical sense, but because grief changes how a person moves through space. The grieving person is quieter, slower, less sudden in their movements, more like part of the environment. And so the bird comes closer. And the closeness, in a moment when the heart is raw and open and looking for something, feels like intention. Now here is where the science becomes genuinely extraordinary. Cardinals are not simply colorful, non-migratory birds that happen to tolerate human presence. They are cognitively sophisticated in ways that most people who watch them at the feeder have never been told. Research published across multiple ornithological and behavioral ecology journals has documented that cardinals recognize individual humans, not humans as a category, not large moving creatures to be avoided. Specific individual people, they track movement patterns. They associate specific individuals with safety or with threat. They adjust their behavior across time based on the accumulated history of interactions with a particular person, which means the cardinal at your window is not looking at a generic human presence. It may be looking at you, specifically, at someone it has encountered before, at a presence it has quietly categorized over weeks or months of observation, at a person who has suddenly, after a loss, begun behaving differently, spending more time near the window, moving more slowly through the yard, sitting in places and at hours they did not sit before. Birds continuously update what researchers call environmental models, mental representations of their territory, the creatures within it, and the patterns of behavior those creatures follow. When something in that model changes, when a familiar element shifts, the bird note. When the human who used to rush past the window every morning is now sitting motionless beside it for an hour, the cardinal registers that change, and it investigates. And in the moment when a grieving person looks into the eye of a cardinal from 2 feet away, in the silence of a yard that used to feel full and now feels emptied of something essential, the experience becomes very difficult to simply file away under coincidence. Cardinals mate for life, or very close to it. This single biological fact has offered more comfort to grieving people than almost anything else associated with this bird. Northern cardinals form long-term pair bonds, documented across multiple breeding seasons. They have been observed maintaining the same partnership for the entirety of their lives in the wild. During nesting season, the male brings food to the female and places it gently in her beak, in a behavior called mate feeding, documented across thousands of field observations. A gesture so tender that researchers who study it professionally still describe it in language that sounds more like poetry than science. When one partner dies, cardinals have been observed returning to locations strongly associated with their lost mate, returning to the same branch, calling into an empty space, waiting in places where the other bird used to be. For a person who has just lost a partner of 30 or 40 or 50 years, for someone whose entire daily life was organized around the presence of another person and who is now learning what it means to move through the same spaces alone. This information is not academic. The bird at the window is a creature that understands, in its own biological way, what it means to build a life around one other being, what it means to lose them, what it means to keep returning to the places where they used to exist. And the cardinal does not leave. It does not migrate when the cold comes. It does not disappear when the yard empties. It is there in February when grief is at its least poetic and most exhausting. It is there on the anniversary. It is there on what would have been a birthday. It is there on the ordinary Thursday mornings that are somehow harder than the holidays because no one warned you about Thursday mornings. It stays in almost every Native American tradition that references the cardinal. The bird carries associations with relationship, with home, with the warmth of the domestic world, and with the persistence of love beyond physical separation. In Cherokee tradition, the cardinal is connected to the sun and to the idea that certain bonds continue to exist beyond what living eyes can verify. That warmth does not simply end because the source of it has moved somewhere the living cannot follow. Among the Choctaw, the cardinal has long been associated with good relationships and with emotional connection that persists across distances, and separations that should, by ordinary understanding, make connection impossible. These traditions were not constructed from wishful thinking. They developed across centuries and generations of close observation of a bird that is vivid, present, loyal, and constant. A bird that stays when everything else migrates. A bird that returns to the same places with extraordinary consistency year after year. A bird that looks directly at you with the quality of attention that does not feel like the ordinary awareness of an animal going about its business. People noticed this. For a very long time, across many different cultures, people noticed this, and they built meaning around what they noticed. Not because they were superstitious, because they were paying attention. In modern American culture, the association between cardinals and lost loved ones has become one of the most widespread informal grief traditions in the country. There is a phrase so common it now appears on memorial stones and sympathy cards and garden markers in every state. When a cardinal appears, a loved one is near. No one knows precisely where this saying originated. It appears to have emerged organically, without a single author, from the overlapping experiences of an enormous number of people across many decades. Too many people in too many different places, under too many different circumstances, for it to be explained entirely as a story people tell themselves, because grief makes them want to believe. Because here's what I want you to hold for a moment. Grief does not move in a straight line. Anyone who has truly lived it knows this. There are stretches where you function, where you complete the tasks of the day and answer messages and eat meals, and it almost feels like normal. And then there are moments, unpredictable moments, when the loss returns with its full original weight. On an ordinary afternoon, in the middle of a grocery store. On a Tuesday morning when nothing particular is happening and the grief arrives as if the weeks of relative calm had never occurred. And it is precisely on those days, according to the accounts of hundreds of thousands of families across this country, that the cardinal appears. Is this confirmation bias? It is genuinely possible. We are more likely to notice and remember things that confirm what we are emotionally primed to believe. When we are open, when we are hurting, when we are looking for something, we find things we might otherwise walk past. That is a real psychological phenomenon, and I will not pretend otherwise. But I will tell you this. The cardinal is one of the only birds in North America that is present in your yard on every single day of every single year. Every season, every kind of weather, every anniversary. Every birthday that arrives without the person who should be there for it. Every morning when the grief returns without warning, it does not leave. And if you have placed a feeder, if you have made even the smallest space for this bird, it will return to that space with a consistency and reliability that feels, to many people, like something more than territorial habit or food source memory. The ornithologist would say, it is exactly that. Territorial loyalty, resource familiarity, predictable return behavior. The grieving daughter standing at the window in February would say it is her mother. And I genuinely believe, that both of those things can be true at the same time. Science and meaning are not always in competition. They're not always describing different things. Sometimes they are simply two different languages being used to describe the same moment from different angles. And the moment itself is real, regardless of which language you choose to describe it in. Before we close, I want to say something directly to you. Because if you have stayed with this video until now, there is probably a reason. Maybe you have had an experience like the ones we have described. Maybe a cardinal appeared after a loss that broke something open in you and you have never fully known what to do with that memory. Maybe you have told almost no one because you are not sure how to explain it without sounding like someone who had let grief make them irrational. You are not irrational. You are a person who is paying attention. You are a person who was present in a moment that mattered and who allowed it to matter. That is not weakness. That is not wishful thinking. That is one of the most human things there is. The cardinal at your window is a creature of extraordinary biology. It sees colors you cannot see. It remembers your face. It stays when everything else leaves. It mates for life and returns to the places associated with those it has lost. It is vivid and present and constant in a way that almost nothing else in the natural world quite manages to be. Whether it carries a message from someone you loved is not a question science can answer, but the experience of receiving it is real, and you are allowed to let it be real. Cardinals are drawn to platform feeders stocked with safflower seeds and black oil sunflower seeds. They prefer low, dense shrubs for cover and shelter. Native species like dogwood, hawthorn, and elderberry. They are most active at dawn and at dusk. Those are the moments to be near the window. But more than the feeder or the specific shrubs, what the cardinal returns to again and again across thousands of reported experiences is simply a person who is present, who is watching, who has not closed themselves off entirely to the possibility that the world contains more than what can be easily explained. So leave the window unobstructed. Step outside in the early morning before the day fills with noise. And if a flash of red appears at a moment when you needed something, let yourself receive it without immediately reaching for an explanation. You do not have to explain it to anyone. You do not have to decide what it means in order to allow it to mean something. I want to hear from you in the comments. If a cardinal has ever appeared at a moment like the ones we described today, please tell me. A specific day, a specific loss, a specific moment when that bird arrived and something in you simply knew, even if you could not say knew what exactly. Tell me in the comments. Every story matters, and the people reading those comments right now, some of them in their very first week of loss, need to hear your experience more than you might realize. I will see you in the next one.